My friends, hey you and welcome. My name is Mike and here, listen, how we doing today? Good, bad, indifferent? Well, here, listen, I hear you're barking, big dog. You know, I'm either, happy for you, sorry about that, or, meh. I'm feeling kind of meh myself today, to be honest. Like, there's goddamn construction on the road outside my house, and the whole place, like, shakes from time to time. It's really pissing me off, as you can tell. I swear to God, I'm going to start shitting in bottles and throwing it at them if they don't stop soon. Like, I'm going to start launching Molotov cocktails, but worse. Unfortunately, though, they know where I live, and there's kind of a lot of them, so I imagine they would kind of storm up here and kick my ass. Don't come in, I have poo! Well, that's an image for you folks. Great way to start this podcast. So, here I have a story for you that, has really nothing to do with what I was just talking about. So you're welcome, I guess. It's a little insight into Mike's life. And this is a case I briefly touched on years ago. 3 friggin' years, man. Now, at the time, this case, when I first covered it, it was unsolved, or it was unfinished, at the very least. Now, it's both. And let me tell you something, folks. It's about a goddamn sex cult. Now, I know what you're thinking. Hell yeah, brother. But no, away with the tissues. It's not one of those. Since I last covered this story, it's only gotten crazier. It's like one of those, if it was a movie, I'd call bullshit. But nope, it happened. Now, before we get into it, folks, please, if I could ask you, follow, subscribe, rate and review. Leave me some reviews. Actually, if there's some funny ones, I'll read them out on a future podcast. But now, let's give it a go. To Lincoln, Nebraska we go, and the date is the 17th of November, 2017. What was I doing that day, I wonder? Actually, I don't. I probably was doing sweet fuck all. But for someone else, this was a memorable day. 24-year-old Sydney Loofe wasn't where she was supposed to be. Police had been called to perform a welfare check after Sydney hadn't shown up for work at Menard's home improvement store the day before. She was a no-show for her shift on the 16th of November. Now, the police found her apartment door locked, and apart from Mimsy, that's Sydney's little cat, not having food or water left out, you know, there was nothing else strange. Certainly nothing that would cause, like, the police officers who rocked up there to believe, oh shit, we should, like, investigate. Like, there's nothing that would cause them to believe Sydney was in imminent danger or had met with some kind of nefarious end. So, they secured the property, they fed the cat, and they left. Now, Susie Loofe, that's Sydney's mother, she knew her daughter better. And she also knew that just 3 days before, her daughter, Sydney, had been to a new doctor to get some medication after falling into some depression. She had some depression and she was getting some mood lifters, I guess. So with this in mind, thinking, oh, that's not great, maybe she hurt herself, Susie performed her own welfare check, along with Sydney's sister Mackenzie. Now, the mother and daughter team, they found exactly what the police had. No signs of any altercation or struggle, but Sydney, knowing her daughter as she did, knew that Sydney would never leave her home without some of the items that were still there. Like, this is shit she just wouldn't leave behind. Like, her glasses, her purse, and her vroom car. But most importantly, she loved the goddamn Mimsy over here. She wouldn't leave a cat without food or water for over 24 hours, right? So Susie called 911 again. This time, no welfare check. Listen up, lads. My daughter is missing. And the police responded quickly. They put out an alert to be on the lookout for a 5'7" blonde, in her early 20s, around 137 pounds, with ocean blue eyes. Sydney also had several unique tattoos, including an ornate yin-yang, and so she should be, she would stand out in a crowd. Now, Sydney Loofe, she grew up in Neely, Nebraska. Hell yeah, brother, cornfields. Nebraska, a state so great that Bruce Springsteen named his most depressing album after it. She had an older brother, Levi, and a younger sister, Mackenzie, making her the middle child of 1 to a 3. In 2011, Sydney graduated from Neeli Oakdale High School, where her father, George, was the principal. Man, that must have been awkward. Funny story, my mother was a school teacher in the school I went to growing up, and when I had class with her, never did I want to disappear more. True story. I actually did call her mom once. Yeah, it happens. Oh god, I suck. So, back to the Loofes. You could say education was the family trade, with Susie, Sydney's mother. She was an elementary resource teacher, and both of her siblings were going on to pursue majors and eventually careers in education. Sydney herself was a versatile athlete. She played basketball, golf, and volleyball. She even tried her hand at acting, taking part in a school production, and, in her free time, she would be happy to go to other basketball, volleyball games, record some stats. After her graduation, and unsure of what she wanted to do, the next big step in her life, Sydney accepted a transfer for work and moved from Neeli to Lincoln, Nebraska. Now, Sydney, described as an all-round, responsible young adult who loved to spend time with her family, she adored fishing, and mimsy. So, the last time anyone had heard from Sydney was 2 days earlier, on the 15th of December, when she exchanged text messages with a friend, and she had sent a Snapchat to multiple people, including co-workers at Maynard's. The Snapchat she had sent was a picture of herself, selfie smiling with the caption, "Ready for my date." Oh to the fucking O. Brooklyn McChrystal, a friend and coworker who had received that message, she was expecting all the goss about the date the next day at work at Maynard's. But of course, that was the shift Sydney never showed for. Brooklyn, however, she did know that Sydney had been on a date with a girl named Audrey, whom, she had met a few days earlier on Tinder, before meeting IRL, that's kid for in real life, for a date on the 15th of November. Okay, so she'd been talking to some girl named Audrey on Tinder, goes on a date for the 15th, never shows on the 16th. Now Brooklyn didn't know much about this Audrey, I'm doing quotation marks here with my hands, you can't see, but I am. Who is this cat, Sydney, now, she obviously was talking to Brooklyn about this coming up, and she was worried about meeting Audrey, as she had met with girls she'd matched with on Tinder in the past, but it never really went too well. Usually she would go on a date with another girl, only to find out that this other girl had a boyfriend, and they were looking for a threesome. Oh yeah, they were thinking. Not Sydney, though. That's not what Sydney wanted. But she had been reassured by Audrey. Sydney had asked, would it just be the two of them on the date? And Audrey replied, yep, of course. So, get a load of this, right? In a monumental act of being a good old friend, Brooklyn went to Tinder and began swiping. She began swiping through profile after profile, female profiles in the area. She was on the hunt. And then she finally came across a pretty brunette with tattoos and a rebel vibe named Audrey. And a filter giving her a crown of flowers made her instantly stand out. And more importantly, she was only 32 miles from Lincoln, in the tiniest of tiny towns, that'd be Wilbur. So Brooklyn had found Audrey. Did Audrey know anything about what happened to Sydney? Well, Brooklyn was determined to find out. Now, Lincoln, while it is the capital city of Nebraska, it's a lot smaller and less populated than nearby Omaha. And it doesn't have quite the same big town feel to it that other capital cities have, right? But compared to Wilbur, Lincoln may as well be goddamn New York City. So, amateur detective Brooklyn, she swiped right, she got a match, and then she quickly got a phone number. And she started messaging this Audrey, again doing the old quotation marks over here, trying to find out as much as possible. Audrey said she worked in finance, and of course, she currently lives in Wilbur. It wasn't much, but it was enough for Brooklyn to pass this on to the Popo police, and alright, here listen, I have the last person Sydney spoke with, or was with, or whatever. Balls in your court now, police. The official investigators at the Lincoln Police Department and the FBI who were involved at this point, they took this tip very seriously. Thanks, Brooklyn, and the initiative got going early in the investigation. So, with the Tinder legwork done, detectives quickly made Audrey the focus of their investigation. She was the She was the last person to have seen Sydney, of course, before she went missing. But in this is where, the first twist kind of comes in. A worrying turn of events, it didn't take long for detectives to find out that this Audrey didn't exist. Catfished again! And the person behind the profile was a 24-year-old woman named Bailey Boswell. Now, Bailey grew up in Iowa. Though her father was murdered when she was an infant, Bailey, just kind of skimming over that, Bailey was by most accounts a bright and bubbly little gal. She was a keen athlete, just like Sydney. She excelled on the basketball court, eventually being offered a scholarship to play at the college level at AIB Business School in Des Moines after she graduated from high school. So, okay, so far, so good. She had, not the best starts with her dad being murdered, but Bailey was doing good. She excelled in sports. She had a scholarship. But, now we get to the not so good part regarding the mysterious catfisher named Bailey Boswell. See, this would all change for Bailey when, according to her stepfather, Jeffrey, the Bailey who went away to college, that was not the same Bailey who came back. She was an imposter, ladies and gentlemen. Bailey had become involved with a man named Freddie. Well, that's your first mistake. Who she would go on to have a daughter with before she turned 20 years old. Now, this Freddie, get a load of this. What a piece of shit. He was violent and controlling with Bailey. He even pushed her down a flight of stairs once before kicking her in the face while she was pregnant. Her parents, her mother and her stepfather, they begged Bailey to leave him multiple times after, her stepfather, Jeffrey, he would have to come up and get her from time to time when the abuse got too much. He'd take Bailey home, but guess what? Surprise, surprise, Bailey would go straight back to Freddie. This was like the same shit we see in every abusive relationship. Oh, he didn't mean to beat the shit out of me. He's a nice guy underneath it all. He can change. It's the usual excuses, and it sucks because a lot of times this ends in murder. So this, coupled with Freddie's drug abuse, led to her parents taking full custody of her young daughter. So Bailey, by then being pretty much a broken shell of her former self and being finally desperate to get away from the abusive relationship she had with Freddie, she was eventually able to leave, and she tried to start again by moving to Princeton, Iowa. Sadly, rather than being the fresh start she was looking for, Bailey instead ran into another, way more sinister fucker named Aubrey Trail. Like, this is out of the frying pan into the fire, this fucking guy. Like so many abusers, 51-year-old cocksucker Aubrey Trail, he offered Bailey safety and security, while the usual, slowly isolating her from her family, and in the end, all of reality. Now this Butte, he was a career petty criminal. He had a long history of theft, fraud, passing multiple bad checks. Now, he had a long criminal history, but he wasn't exactly a criminal mastermind. All the crimes he had been in for were all pretty minor, probably because he was just too stupid to do anything major. And all that honestly makes, the direction this story is going in, all the weirder. Okay, so picture this, right? When you think of a cult leader, the image conjuring in your head, it kind of has some kind of respectability, relatability, and usually quite a lot of charm, right? Because they have to charm the people who are into their cult. A lot of times, the cult leader will be a handsome guy, good looking, long hair at times, but there's usually something behind the eyes. Aubrey Trail had none of these qualities, yet he managed to persuade several vulnerable young women to not only enter into sexual relationships with him, but to risk their own freedoms by supporting him in his little petty crime bullshit. Honestly, goes to show, lads out there who are having a tough time. All you need to be is a complete fucking sociopath, and you too can take advantage of broken women. Now, this guy, he's kind of fat, big, fat round head, and a little pedo mustache. He looks like someone you wouldn't trust to mow your lawn. The definition of small town criminal, it's him, it's his picture, like a thoroughly unremarkable looking fella, which makes what he did all the more remarkable. So, it was in the couple's, Aubrey and Bailey's, rented apartment located in a basement of a Wilbur duplex. That's where Bailey was posed as Audrey, and had apparently entertained Sydney on their first date. Audrey, not even trying, god damn it. So the information provided by Brooklyn McChrystal, that combined with the cell phone tower data placing Sydney in Wilbur in their apartment, that was enough for officers from the Lincoln Police Department to conduct an urgent welfare check and then a day later execute a search warrant on Aubrey and Bailey's place. But when they went in there, they wouldn't find anything out of the ordinary, except for noting a strong smell of bleach. The odor, by the way, in their little shitty apartment, it was so strong, it even caused the couple's landlord, who lived above them, to complain that it made a relative of theirs throw up and break out in hives, like it was an acid gas in the air. That's how bad the bleach was. Like, isn't it if you mix bleach with something, it creates like chlorine gas or something like that? Like fucking mustard gas? Well, okay, it's almost that. And the owner was also saying, oh, the couple, Aubrey and Bailey, were running the air conditioning nonstop, despite it being, at a colder time of year. Like, we're talking November. But there was absolutely no sign of Aubrey or Bailey there. Then, on the 28th of November, 13 days after Sydney was last seen, authorities publicly named Aubrey Trail and Bailey Boswell as persons of interest and appealed for any information regarding their whereabouts. And they got a response from the couple themselves. These two fucking guys, they filmed like a Facebook Live saying, well, I'll let them speak for themselves.
Good morning, Lincoln and Omaha and probably several other places. This is Aubrey Trail and this is Bailey Boswell. I guess y'all also know her as Audrey. But we've spent the last few days watching ourselves being slammed and crucified in the newspapers and the news and everything else, so we thought it was time we had our say. We're not trying to defend anything. We're not trying to make you believe anything. We just feel we should get to say our side since everyone else gets to say theirs. Unlike the Lincoln Police Department and Saline County Police Department and all those folks, everything we're going to tell you, you're going to be able to pick up the phone or have a newspaper pick up the phone and very easily verify it. The Lincoln Police Department apparently wants everyone to believe that we're hiding, that we haven't talked to them, that we're avoiding them. Actually, we've spoken to the Lincoln Police Department a couple of times. You've already crucified us in the newspapers. You've already crucified us on Facebook. In America, I sure thought it was a trial first, but I guess not. You've heard all of this stuff about my criminal history. All true. Been convicted of bad checks and forgery and all that good stuff, but never been convicted of anything like, I guess I'm a person of interest on now.
In a Facebook live stream broadcast from the couple's car, Bailey addressed the public and the investigators while dressed as, The Unabomber is probably the best way of putting it. Big sunglasses, a hood, all dressed in black. Nothing says I'm innocent like cosplaying as a notorious fugitive.
I'm Bailey, Audrey on Tinder, and a few other names because I have warrants, but this really isn't about me. This is about Sydney, and she asked me to drop her off at a friend's house, so I did so. I gave her my number. We were planning to go to the casino that weekend. I haven't heard from her since.
Bailey and Aubrey, though, they maintained their innocence and insisted they were cooperating with the police and they were not on the run. We're just out for a nice lovely walk, guys. Don't wait up. They even took the time to attempt a humble brag about making $100,000 a year selling antiques. Just kind of like throwing that out there. Nothing to do with anything, but hey, would people who make $100,000 a year selling antiques really, be up to something nefarious? I don't think so.
Lincoln Police Department failed to tell you that me and Bailey do about $100,000 a year business in antiques on eBay, the antique malls in Lincoln, Omaha, all this stuff. they will have you believe that I'm still just a criminal running around. But I don't really need to explain all of that because, as far as I know, I'm not wanted for anything. I'm a person of interest, and I'm not really running from anything. I mean, naturally, I can't go home now because my house has been swarmed, searched, and I'm being looked for.
Aubrey, though, he was just such a full-on bullshitter and kind of made these claims, grandiose claims about himself, and he was always kind of completely unchallenged by his little brainwashed minions, that he forgot he was running a scam and started to believe his own bullshit. The couple would be on a second Facebook live stream, if you can believe that, this time from their motel room, to once again go off and just ramble about their innocence and lack of involvement. In the video, Aubrey complained about how he and Bailey are being represented in the media. You're making us look like the bad guys, people who are most definitely not on the run and most definitely did not murder somebody. They were also outraged that the police were tarring them with this brush. I mean, honestly, guys, it's police harassment.
Hi, folks. Aubrey Trail here. I've been watching all day. I just watched the news. That's why I'm making this. First thing I want to clarify is the news just reported that our contact with the police in Lincoln never took place. Well, let me assure you that it did. The police can say or do what they want, as I can, so you'll believe what you believe. So far today, from the comments, we have apparently murdered this lady. We have apparently put her into human trafficking and sold her. And not only did we do that, we used the money. We went to the casino that weekend and used the money that we sold her for. You know nothing about us except that I have a criminal history. You used me saying that Bailey and I make a lot of money on antiques as me bragging. I was simply saying it to show you that I'm no longer with the criminal activity and I run a legitimate business now. Then go back and text and message amongst yourself and continue to say what real pieces of shit we are. What was it? I'm a pedophile? Yeah. No, I like adults. I like females, 20s, 30s, who'll sue me. I'm an old horny guy, so what? Don't call me a fucking pedophile. I hate fucking pedophiles. I hate anyone that messes with children.
But they wouldn't be on the run for too long, as it turned out. The same day, they recorded their second live stream, and just 2 days after being named as POIs, on the 30th of November, police picked up the couple on charges of handling stolen goods at their Branson, Missouri hotel. Well, it's easy to make $100,000 a year selling antiques if you're just fucking robbing them, I suppose. If it wasn't already blatantly obvious to the officers that the two were involved in Sydney's disappearance in some fashion, the fact that in the couple's room, the arresting officers found maps, sleeping bags, and hiking shoes. They were clearly planning on going for a nice little walk out of America. But, once they were arrested in custody, Bailey and Aubrey, they stuck to the story. The same one they said in the live stream. They had last seen Sydney when they dropped her off at a friend's house. Never saw her again. Now, they didn't have a name for this friend, and so the story kind of quickly just fell apart. It's also it's pretty much impossible to follow the thread of what Aubrey claimed had happened that very night. Like, he was on the fly, just making stuff up every day. He was interviewed more than a dozen times. His story was never the same in any interview session. And every time, he would be questioned by police in these interviews, and the police would contradict something he said with a piece of evidence, as in, with a reverse Uno card, essentially. He'd be like, oh wait, did I say this? I meant that. His story was constantly changing. Shapeshifter over here, The story was never the same, but, I mean, it's pretty easy, because he could never, repeat the same story. His story was all changing because he couldn't remember what story he was trying to tell. And any remaining hope of bringing Sydney home safely was finally extinguished on the 4th of December, when a person walking out in Clay County made a grim discovery. Clay County, about an hour west of Lincoln, middle of nowhere territory. something protruding out of a black trash bag caught this person's eye, and kind of going over for a bit of a goo, saw that it was a human arm. So police raced to the scene and found that not only was that arm not attached to a body, there were multiple other bags in the area, in ditches in that area. Each contained a separate body part. And on one of the arms was a distinctive tattoo. Sydney's tattoo, so there was no doubt about who this was. Sydney Loofe had been cut into 14 parts, only 13 of which were ever recovered. The upper part of her left arm, that was never found. And most disturbingly, some sick shit here for you folks, her internal organs, including her heart, were missing and were never found. It's still unknown if this was caused by animals, when she was chopped up, or as part of the murder itself and then the subsequent cleanup. CCTV from a Home Depot would come to light, and both suspects would be charged with first-degree murder, improper disposal of human remains, and conspiracy to commit murder. In that CCTV footage recorded on the 15th of November, which was the same day Sydney was last known to be alive, Aubrey and Bailey were seen buying tin snips, hacksaws, drop cloths, and a utility knife, tools. And later, footage of Aubrey buying items from the same Menards where Sydney worked would be found, as well as footage showing Bailey buying multiple bottles of bleach. In that Maynard's footage, by the way, Aubrey could be seen glancing over his shoulder at a passing Sydney before he made a 1 to 2 minute phone call to Bailey. Aubrey was stalking Sydney before her date. Goddamn. Now to go back, when first arrested at the motel, Bailey was found to have a handwritten list of names in her possession. And next to each name, there was a dozen female names there. What was a quality, such as healing or seer. Were these D&D characters, I hear you ask? No. Buckle the shit up. At trial, 3 separate witnesses told the court that Aubrey, he was the leader of a witch cult.
Satanic black magic. Sick shit.
Yeah, you heard I right. Aubrey Trail would himself testify that he recruited a dozen girls who he would refer to as his witches. He would refer to himself as a vampire and would insist that the girls call him and Bailey mommy and daddy. Wow, this is sick shit. I mean, I know Aubrey and Bailey broken herself, they would hunt on broken young women. You have to be lobotomized, I think, to go along with this shit. Basically, what he would do was have Bailey lure girls in with a fake Tinder profile, and then Aubrey would integrate them into his criminal activities, having them steal and sell antiques. Hey, it was making him over 100 grand a year, so, don't mock it. He had the girls under so much of his control that they believed he had supernatural powers, including, being able to control minds and being able to fly. Oh shit, really? Aubrey apparently told the girls they themselves could gain power by going out and torturing other people. The longer the torture went on, the stronger they would become. All 3 women said Aubrey he would pay for their shit, like rent, clothes, manicures, and he would give them a weekly allowance of a whole $200. Now, by this time, Aubrey had admitted to killing Sydney, but pleaded not guilty to murder. Rather, he insisted it was a tragic accident. It was a result of, erotic asphyxiation gone wrong. And he said that Sydney was far more involved with himself and Bailey than anyone knew. She was one of his little witches. Sydney, according to Aubrey, was part of his cult and a willing participant in their sex games. And when Sydney accidentally died, he said he panicked, he dismembered her body, and he put the pieces in his car before driving to Clay County, where it would later be found. I mean, he has supernatural powers, guys, so he's probably telling the truth. The prosecution argued that the buying of the murder kit, plus statements Aubrey and Bailey made to witnesses in the past, clearly indicated that the couple had planned on killing someone and were prepared to dispose the body. They argued that the couple had deliberately lured in vulnerable young women through Bailey's fake social media accounts and had chosen Sydney as their victim. Bailey then persuaded Sydney to the couple's apartment, where Aubrey strangled her with an extension cord before cutting her up and disposing of her. All part of their little rituals. Early on in this trial, as witnesses were about to begin their testimony, by the way, Aubrey Trail, he stood up and he yelled, "Bailey is innocent and I curse you all!" before almost doing us all a favor and stabbing himself in the throat. I'm surprised the deputies didn't go over and, you missed a bit.
Bailey is innocent and I curse you all.
Honestly, it was probably more of a last-ditch attempt to build some kind of insanity defense. Or at the very least, just not having to attend the rest of his trial and face the Loofe family. Or he did believe he actually had supernatural powers, which would be pretty friggin' sweet. Now, he would make a full recovery, the wounds being mostly superficial, and apart from sporting some haggard new sweet-ass scars that chicks would dig if it was on literally anybody else, and being confined to a wheelchair and handcuffs for the duration of the rest of the trial, Aubrey returned to testify on his own behalf. Probably not helping his own case. He maintained his innocence on the first-degree murder charge and conspiracy charges, only pleading guilty to manslaughter.
I mean, I am the one that caused Sydney's death. I mean, I'm the one that choked Sydney. I don't really care what you believe. I mean, this is what happened. Can't nothing change that. I can't bring Sydney Loofe back. I killed her. I mean, I didn't mean to, but I did.
It, unsurprisingly, took about 2.5 hours for the 12-person jury to unanimously find Aubrey guilty on all of those darn counts. Bailey's trial was a bit less eventful and much more straightforward, to be honest. Her defense team minimized her involvement, and it's all on Aubrey over here, you guys. He did it all. Bailey's a victim here too, you know. A witness, however, who was actually with the couple in the days after the murder, contradicted these claims and told of Bailey's lust for violence, if you can believe that, and how she wanted to talk about murder and mutilation to help get her off. Goddamn, feeling herself up while she's like, talk about cutting the fingers off, oh yeah. The jury took 3 hours this time, returning a unanimous guilty verdict on all counts. At his sentencing, Aubrey would finally address Sydney's family and admit to his lies, probably because he had been sentenced to death. He confessed that everything he'd said about Sydney, it was not true, and that he had in fact murdered Sydney after she freaked out when he tried to recruit her into the little sex cult. He said Sydney didn't respond at all how he thought she would. He thought she'd love it. No, I guess he was like, what? He's probably so disappointed. Then he locked her in the bedroom to get her to try and calm down, and when she didn't, usually kind of confining somebody, kidnapping somebody, doesn't make them calm down, surprisingly. So when that didn't work, he went in and he killed her.
Go ahead.
First, I would like to say that even though I have to direct my statement to the court, I understand that it's not for the court, it's for Sydney Loofe's family. And I also want you to know that my attorneys could only defend me on what I told them. And I think they did a great job at that, but they could only work with what I told them, I guess is what I'm trying to say. I don't want to do this like a coward. Is there any way that I can come to that side of the table and face the Loofe family when I read this statement to them?
No, sir, you need to stay where you are.
Yes, ma'am. I won't say I'm sorry, as that would be an insult to you after what I've put you through. And I won't ask for forgiveness, as I don't believe there is such a thing. I doubt that there is such a thing as closure in a case such as this.
He insisted, though, that it was just him, that Bailey hadn't been involved until after he'd killed Sydney. He asked Bailey to help him move the body, but Bailey couldn't even do that. She just was sick to her stomach. So he had to finish the job himself. As I said, Aubrey was sentenced to death. At Bailey's sentencing hearing, her mother, Priscilla, would plead with the court to spare her daughter's life, and instead opt for life in prison.
Please don't put her to death.
The courts, they'd hear a lot about the abuse Bailey herself had been subjected to, and ultimately this is probably what spared her own life, with one of the 3-judge panel deciding against the death penalty. The other 2 judges were in favour of killing her. So with that, Bailey narrowly avoided a one-way trip to death row. instead being sentenced to life without parole. And there you have it, folks. A story of abuse, witches, powers, rituals, and of the sad end of a lovely woman who just she just wanted to put some love out into the world. Also, stories of me throwing poop at construction workers nearby. Aubrey, Bailey, and the construction workers outside. These fucking guys, am I right? Well, that does it for this old podcast, guys. I hope you found it as fascinating and batshit as I did. Which, I mean, come on, you know I only tell you batshit stories because that's the only stories we're telling, in my opinion. But yeah, here, please, if you enjoyed the podcast, if you wouldn't mind leaving a review, if you leave some interesting or funny ones, I'll definitely read them out in a future podcast episode, or rate some positive ratings, help me out more than I can tell you. And the next podcast will be out in a couple of days, and so I shall leave it there. As always, I will talk to you real soon, but until then, look after each other, and you know what? You should look after yourself too, because I love you. Mike out.